How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Helder Gonzalez here. Hey, well, today let's go to explore now the React hooks, which is a model from this course taught by Brian Holt, a software engineer that has previously worked at Reddit, Netflix, Microsoft, Cloudflare, and he's currently now at Neon as the staff product manager. I'm not sure what this particular title means. What is the role of that? Uh, Something that might go beyond the scope of today's video. Uh, it might be interesting to understand that, but not right now because what I want to focus my attention is on this and how do we come and how do we get here, right? First, to understand the introduction of this particular course, what is the audience that Brian Holt is now targeting, whether it's you are new to development or if you already have experience to this, as a way to now, based on his experience, how React emerged and why React emerged. Let me make a quick pause here because I want, I need to charge my Mac. And there you go, right? Okay, cool, cool. So, so in this course or in this model, it mainly aims to know why do we get here, why are we using the tool, for example, like React, why we don't go with plain JavaScript, which is something that we can right now at the current state of the JavaScript. But why React was so compelling and adopted by the community, despite that it was developed by Facebook, aka Meta, right? And the value proposition is for PHP developers, those that develop on Hack, which is a flavor of PHP, is very, very easy to write applications in PHP, right? Because you have now the page model where instead of following is the MVC pattern where you have now the data and the controller and the model talk to the database, and then now on the view is what is shown to the users, and then the controllers decide at which route you want to show this content and some policy that you want to add to this, right? So let's go to now bundle all of this, right, into one particular file that has everything that it needs to. So this small user interface. So the idea was quite compelling, but it introduced a lot of challenge along the way. So we built a basic React app, which is, hey, let's go to now download is this CDN versions of the React on development and React the React, which is the API of the developers, the API developer service, right? And the React render or the React DOM that is going to now is paint all of this or render all of this small user interface, right? So you can think of this as you have all of these particularly stem that you already designed, right? That are ready. Anytime you want to call it, bring on that. And that's what now allows to compose, for example, is this particular component here that is an image, and that you have now this input where you can now introduce some text and then some icons and some text like this, and then some other elements now for the main menu, and then design now the layout for this particular application, which is the Google Docs. You have now the sidebar, and then you have the main content. You also have now the most righteous place, another sidebar, which is now all of the Google family apps. The point of this is you are now capable to build from this smaller user interface now complex web UI. So because now with the advancements of a lot of technology, and we're now going back to PHP and the origins of how we can now write our application, for example, in Next, that is now bringing back all of these ideas from the server-side rendering as a way to now improve the development, not only experience, but also the ability for your website to be ranked by web crawlers, right? Or all of these crawlers that rank your page, whether it's from Google search or Yandex or any other search engine out there, but primarily for Google, right? So yeah, it go beyond the scope of today's video, and we're gonna focus our attention is at how can we build this user interface, how now we can have this global reference in JavaScript of React and the React DOM, and how now React allows to create element, which is a thin layer of the HTML elements. Also, the tooling that we're gonna use as a way to make our life much more easy to build now more complex applications. As the complexity grows, you want to now find a way to make sure that everything works as expected. Prettier is the way how you do the code formatting. ESLint to check no JavaScript errors, right? How you can integrate that into your workflow. For example, the eslint.config.gsm, I mean it's MDS, right? As a way to use now is the EX6 standard, and the well, how you can integrate, for example, the most common or the recommending and non-controversial JavaScript as rules, right? And then use Git as a way to keep track of all of these file state changes. And last but not least, Vite, which help us to pretty much like Webpack or Rollup, right? But Vite say, hey, let's going to use now the new advancement in the ecosystems, which is EXS, Promise, and all of these advancements on the JavaScript spec that, of course, browsers now have implemented because you have now the JavaScript spec and the browser spec. They're supposed to be at the same rhythm, the same time with, or to keep up the pace with the JavaScript spec, but the reality is that they don't, right? So because of that, right? So we have now Vite as a way to transpile this, as a way to allow us to use the latest JavaScript spec and provide support to all of these browser vendors out there, Firefox, Safari, Chrome, or any of those Chromium-based browsers. You have now Brave and Arc, so on and so forth, right? And by knowing what this Vite allows us, and also to provide us a dev server, so we can quickly see, so speed up the development feedback. So anytime you make a change in a particular file, you can reflect those changes immediately on the browser. Okay, this is one of the things that I really love of the web, that the development life cycle or the development feedback is fast, bro. It's fast. So you already have everything there. Unlike, for example, C, C++, C Sharp, where you need to, or Python, when you need to install is the language, and therefore the package manager. And then is when you're starting to write your applications, and you need to For example, you're going to develop a web server, then you need to install all of this particular package and so on and so forth. Again, it requires a little bit more setups that with JavaScript, because it's building on the browser, you can already work with it or play with it, right? So in any case, so Vite, it allows this dev server where you can now um, from one particular file, it can map all of these different files and act like if they are on a single file, right? Provide this uh, quicker developer feedback. So anytime you make a change using the hot reload model technique, you can see all of those changes on the browser in the most effective, efficient way possible, and allow us to define is the test pipeline as well as the build, right? So it's now it encompasses all of these technologies. For example, the Jest as a way to define is the testing pipeline as well as a rollout or the build process. And well, briefly talk about what GSX, right? At the end of the day, with React, what you're using is programmatically, in other words, using JavaScript, it allows dynamically to create user interface. So it makes a lot of sense for us to use this particular convention or GSX or just simple GSX, right? Which is a thin layer of a HTML where we can now develop our user interface. And let's going to talk about the React hooks, right? Let's get into this. So GSX was something that was developed by React team to convince hack developer, as I mentioned before, and it was convenient for PHP developer with this page model because now you have everything that you need to ready to be shipped or ready to ship to your users. Now, let's go to React hooks. You got it. Here we are.
Hooks. Let's talk about hooks. Hooks are the way that we can basically introduce like interactivity or side effects or some other things to just a fairly normal React component.
Mm-hmm. Here we talk about creating high order components. So creating high order components. So this is it. So this is the way, or hooks. Hooks is so hook is the way of how you can create reusable logic that can be shared across different components, right? Different components, different React components. Why do we want to do this? So, for example, you can use this your custom hooks, for example, or hooks like useEffect, or useRef, or useReducer, and all that kind of stuff. But the thing here is, we don't want the React team designed that because at the end of the day we are now writing is JavaScript, right? With this GSX, it's just writing JavaScript, and we need to find a way to certain logic that are reusable across different components. Now we need to add to this, all right? So instead of rewriting a function over and over and over and over, 10 different places, we have now this common file where we can now import that this functionality and then use it, right? So good.
One thing we didn't chat too much about is let's actually just go with the P side. One of the key things here is this function body here. It's a very hot code path, and when I say that, I mean it gets run a lot, right? So it renders and re-renders and re-renders, and if it sees like nothing's changing, it doesn't change anything in the DOM. But as soon as it sees something change, then it'll go update. But the key here is this gets run more than you see, right? And so it's important that you keep this to be a very performant. Like you don't want to put like very heavy lifting inside of your render paths. You want to kind of pull it outside of the render path so it doesn't slow down your DOM render. That's key because people will start to notice jank, right? Like things like shifting around if they're too slow. So this is actually it's an important thing to be very performant. So you don't have to follow up this. I'm just going to kind of make an example really quick. But if I do something like const counter equals counter equals plus and counter 0. So instead of name for just a second, or just actually speak for a second. Alright, so you notice this has 0 on it, right? Right now nothing's actually happening to our component. But if we start adding things like this in for events, right? So let's just say onClick equals just do something that doesn't do anything, so just like a function. So this is actually still smart enough to not render anything. That's okay. Still probably not still smart enough to not do anything. But well, this is actually again, you would expect this to probably like keep re-rendering itself, right? But the point I'm actually trying to drive home here is like you don't actually really know when React going to choose to re-render your components and when it's going to choose to run. You can see none of these are ever affected. These are actually different touches for unique. There was actually a millisecond
delay.
That's because React is like doing this thing, these re-render paths, and it's only going to try and re-render whenever it's necessary, and it tries to not re-render when it's not necessary. But you need to make sure that it's going to display the same markup every single time given the same inputs. So something like this where date not now or counter where we were counting before, we call these an effect, right? A side effect to your code. You don't want to have any of those. You want this to make sure that no matter when it's run, you don't know when it's going to run. It's always going to be expected results given the events that you run. So if you were trying to display something where it's going to display a clock, right, you need to make sure that all of that was self-contained and the effects were being rendered properly. We'll get into that when we start talking about useEffect, right? But my point here is stuff like this where you're keeping track of variables outside of React is a bad idea. And now I'm going to show you how you're supposed to keep track of statefulness inside of React. Let's take away all this nonsense. Alright, so let's go ahead and make another component here. We're going to call it order.jsx. We're going to make an order page. Feel free to follow along with me if you want to. This is a somewhat long component. So if you want to just copy and paste from the notes here, I'm not going to judge you too harshly. So another thing here, I think it's a pretty good thing here. Notice here in pizza, we have an arrow function. Let me export the context here. In order, I did it a different way, where I'm doing a named function called order. 99.99% the same way. The only thing where I actually kind of like this pattern better than the arrow function pattern is that when your app crashes, so if I have an error here, order being a named function is going to show up in this matrix, so you can actually see helps with debugging. This pizza here, we will tell you it came from a pizza component, but we'll not tell you the named function because technically this is not a named function, it's an anonymous function.
It's a anonymous function.
The same thing if I did const
For debugging purpose, okay, this is valuable.
block, right? This is exactly the same thing. Pizza 2 would not show up in the stack trace.
Look at this. Tip 1. Oh crap. Tip 1. Okay. Use export default function order. Export default function. The name of the function. Name of function. Okay. Why? Because on the stack trace, it can tell you what function. So it can tell you the okay. Interesting. Why? Because on the stack trace, it can tell you the name of the function. Useful for debugging, and trust me that you need to become an expert of debugging here.
Now you might ask yourself, how important is that to me? It's not super important, right? But it's probably enough for you to know that it's from the order file. You don't necessarily need to know the function. So let's just start writing a bunch of code. Const pizza type. We're going to use this to keep track of what pizza type they've selected, right? So this is the order page where they select what kind of pizza they want, what size they want, what the order, rather add to cart. It's going to be a pepperoni pizza, and we're going to start with the pizza size of medium, just so like the defaults. Pizza size is capital M for medium, and then we'll return a whole lot of money. So call this one. My CSS is structured in such a way that we don't have to write class name on every single thing. That's purely for the sake of this class, so that you don't have to write class name a bunch. In general, please get everything in class. Don't do all the weird selector stuff to make it easier for you. In other words, the CSS is intentionally bad to make it easier for you. That's generally not this trade-off in the world.
Okay.
Alright, H2, let's see, create order page. It's going to have a form, and then it's going to have a div, and another div. And then we're going to do a label. Label thing before pizza dash type. Pizza type. And we're going to select main equals pizza dash type. Oh, we're going to give a value too. Value equals pizza type.
Pixel size.
So value just basically says you're going to set whatever the value of pizza type is to the value here. Okay, we're going to give it a couple of options. Option value equals pepperoni.
Maybe make a quick pause here, or at least to write it down. In this, because I find that out very, very important. So here we're gonna create now is an order component. You say, hey, touch order inside of the source order source order.js, right? Now if I want to navigate to that and say, but this must be is no, wait a single move. So git stash, right? No log ahead. Okay, so I wanna pull from the main origin, pull path reginos from main. Okay, now I got the latest changes, right? Which is now this one. All right, here we can say, hey, git switch. This will be the React hooks. So React hooks. Let me create now this branch here. Okay. And this is and let's go into now build our component. Why are we doing this? This is a very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. Like this. So we're gonna now import is our component. Okay. Import. So import statement from pizza, right? Since we're exporting this as a default, we can do something like this, which is great. And I'm going to use this export default function, and the name of the component here, which is order, Why is this? Because it will help us during debugging time. So now you can look at the stack trace when an error happens, and it can tell you the name of the function, which is unlike, so if unlike, no, it's not this one. So unlike this, so unlike this, can you see this? Or what is cursor? Yes, there you go. Cursor. There you go. So where unlike okay, so unlike the pizza, right? Since this is not a function, in fact, this is an anonymous function, an arrow function, you will never going to see the name of that. And that's this little stuff that that we're looking for are very helpful. Why? Because it will it will help us during debugging. Perhaps right now we don't need to do that, but in the end of the day, I prefer to go with this. And this makes a lot of sense. And this makes a lot of sense. This is also the reason why I'm doing this kind of stuff here to get myself familiar with these small, tiny little details that are helpful and provide a lot of value as developers, because debugging is something important. You are going to debug a lot of stuff. So in any case, here we are. So let's go into define now some couple constants, which is pizza type. Say pizza type. If this is a constant, why you are doing this in a lowercase, binary case, no problem. So pepperoni. Okay. The other is pizza size, so pizza size, right? Now it is M, capital letter M. Give me a second here. Oh shit! Oh my god! Okay, nothing. No. Okay. We good? We good? We good? We good? Right on? We good? Okay. Good. 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 All right. And we are back. All right, no problem. No problem. No problem. Hopefully that this still work. Oh shit. Okay, good. Still working. Still working. Okay. Good. Now, So let's gonna write a lot of markdown here or HTML. This first will be this, say this, using class name. Remember that at the end of the day, GSX is just a thin layer of JavaScript, right? So class name is a valid instance of that. All right. And all of his class names are provided by him, but they are not meant to be used in production. So H2 is create order. So you have now the create order, and then you have now your form. Okay, we're inside of our form. We don't have any action right now. Thanks for the auto completion. We're gonna have now a couple diff. The first one and the second one. The second one will be now all of these inputs, where you're going to have now a label here, an HTML form. Right now there is something we're gonna use la pixel type, right? Pixel type. All right. We're gonna call it here pixel type. And then right below we're gonna have now is a select. Where the name of this is the only different here for labels, if you can note, and the other is select name pixel type. So pixel type, right now we don't have any ID for this, but we're gonna add some value. That'll be is pixel size, right? Or pixel type. Oh, pixel type. And then right below, we're gonna write some options, right? Where the value will be is now pepperoni, pepperoni, pepperoni. Okay. So the pepperoni pixel. We can now make this a little bit much more obvious for us, right? And then say for each one of them, so the pixel, and here we put now the name, for example, pepperoni, pepperoni, and then right below we put here is the Hawaiian. With two A, with two I, Hawaiian. Okay. And then we got is this, which is here. And last but not least is the big meat. So here we say, hey, this is big meat. And here we make it lowercase, say big meat. Okie dokie. Okay. And then after that, we're gonna create now is another section here, which is right below the div. We're gonna create another input, right? Div. You can say something like this. Div span. I mean, this div span, right? And then now you create this one. So div span and input. Let me do this. Div span and input, right? Let's actually create that for us. I don't want to be this to be a type text, in fact type radio, where now if this is, if the check property, so if this pix size is triple equals to m to s, right, then I want you to show the value of that, right? So the value here will be is s. And there's some other ID, for example, the pizza s, and then some name to this, right? So pizza size. So pizza size. You can save this. Look at this. Now we get this auto completion format for us.
Label again for pizza dash S. This is a small size. So we're doing radio buttons for all the various different sizes of pizza, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this span.
Exactly. So we're doing a lot of these radio buttons here for that.
This one is going to be medium, so just capital G.
Label. So label here. Which HTML form. What will be the name of this? Like what, the size, right? Pizza S. Okay. So pizza S, and the label of it will be is small. And if you want to now, because we're going to copy all of this, I want to copy from the span, exactly, which is okay. Okay. Now, if I do this, and if I do this, but if I do this, okay, okay. Okay. Okay, it's this one. Okay. It's this one. There you got it. So now once we did this, alright, this is small. I want to show this as a medium with the value M and the pixel M. Name pixel size. Pixel M, right? And this will be medium. Why are we doing this? Because with the label we want to assign now, so we are so we are creating these radio buttons with their labels. Just L, then you say large.
Pretty similar. Okay. So with that, it's span.
Okay.
To cart. Okay. Inside of that, we're going to make a div. Ryan, you have too many divs. I'm not going to disagree with you. Order dash pizza. Put a pizza in here. Right now we're just going to give it a normal pepperoni pizza, but eventually we'll make it dynamic, like to be the one that you have selected, right? But for now we're just going to say pepperoni. Just want to put the price. We'll put that in a P. We'll say whatever you want there. $13.37. Okay. So basically we're just working on forms here, right? The classic thing for most flips. Most stuff can be boiled down to just submitting a form somewhere. Using some divs here. That's all, I know all the divs seem excessive, but it's for the styling, right? Just to kind of get everything grouped together visually. We got some radio buttons here, so they can be small, medium, or large. That sounds good. And we have a submit button that adds to cart, which will submit the form. We'll get to how to handle that form submittal. Let's
That makes a lot of sense.
save here. So yeah, we've now created an order component. You have to go use it before anything's going to show up, right? So let's go to our app.jsx. I'm not going to disagree. Order dash pizza.
So all it's going to now create is the
Pizza in here. Right
bottom
now,
here.
a normal pepperoni pizza, but eventually we'll make it dynamic, like to be the one that you have selected, right? I'm not going to judge you too harshly. Still looking at it. Alright, so another opinion here. I think it's a pretty good opinion. Notice here in pizza, we have an arrow function.
So once we do this, for example, right, and we create this and so on and so forth. So what we did here is just to create. Okay. Yeah. So this is also something that we know, all right. But what we did here, and can be quite obvious in the questions, is because we create now is So what we did here is just to create, okay, what we did here is just to create is this stamp, because that's what the order is. So we create now this particular function, and we say export default function and the name of the function, but this is an opinionated do debugging, right? So on the stack trace, we are going to be able to see the name of the function, which is helpful. And what we did is just to create this entire HTML, this stamp that is ready to be used, and we're gonna use that. I don't know when, but I think this is app.js, something like that. I don't know when they have the ability to do this. Oh, okay, on the app here.
And now
We're
I'm
gonna
just
say is
so
import
I'm just gonna
from the order,
say, okay,
and because we export this as a default, we're gonna do is this.
you should see something.
Right? So for now, we're gonna get rid of all of the pixel here and say, hey, I want to print or render order here, just like that. And now when we run this, I think this is supposed to be already running. We're running is the dev server, history restore. Oh, the dev server died, npm run dev, and now the front end npm run dev, and when we navigate to the website, right, we are now able to look at this. What it is, there you go. Right, pretty straightforward. Or simple form, we have this. So small, medium, and large, right? The pepperoni, Oyanen, bitmig. For some reason, it doesn't change that. But at least we define is look at how it's refreshing. But at least we have is the size already set up.
Okay. You should see something akin to this. Probably have some errors in here, that's fine. Ignore those for now.
Okay, created the order component. So we did this. We create high order component. So here we're gonna say get status, get add everything, get status again, get commit with a message and say high order function. Okay. So this is order component, high order function for debugging. Order component. Oh, we use this the order component. Exactly. Order component huff like this. So order component huff with default for easy to test, for easy testing. Right, there you got it. We're going to say push origin, and make it padre genos, make this right now at the hook, okay, to upstream from that, and there you got it. So now we create our new branch here, and here we are, right? So here we're going to explore topics like creating huff and an opinionated, creating a huff and an opinionated definition. Okay, which means that this one, this is the tip one, right? You're doing this, say tip one, use export default, like this. All right, that's a code. Why? Because on the stack trace, it can tell you the name of the function. Useful for debugging, bro. Just like that. Useful for debugging, right? All right. You got it. Push that. There you got it. Cool. Next one.
So let's talk a little bit about doing order form. This will eventually look nicer once we have like all the pieces put together. I want you to try and select a different type of pizza.
Exactly. It's not working.
It doesn't work, right? It broke the browser, which is actually kind of hard to do, right? Like the browser works really well at creating these types of forms, and whatever we did with React made it not work, which seems kind of counterproductive, right? Same thing with pizza size. Click on one of these other buttons. No matter what, you're always going to be selecting small or large. That's annoying, right? We expect the radio buttons to work so that you
It's
can
already
select
fixed.
small or large. Well, the reason would be why this is happening. All right. So you have pepperoni here, right? Which is the value here. So that's why it's selecting that. Now I click Hawaiian, right? I click Hawaiian here. What happens? React says, hey, an event happens. The user did something. It's time for us to re-render this component, right? So it goes through and it re-renders this component. Says, oh, pizza type, pepperoni, right? And so it sets the value to be pizza type, pepperoni. So even though the user's clicking on something else, it's immediately sending it back to where it was because this isn't dynamic, right? This is just assigned, and then it just stays that way. So we have to do some sort of assigning pizza type to be something different, or else it's just going to continually be that. This is just a roundabout way of me explaining and showing to you that two-way data binding is not free in React. There's some other frameworks, famously Angular 1, right, was a big two-way data binding framework. And that's just not true anymore. We found that that's very fun to write and very bad to maintain because it becomes very black magic of like, where did this variable come from? It's part of the magic of React. It is verbose. I'm not going to argue with you that it's not. It could be shorter or more terse or something like that. It's a little less fun to write, but it's a lot more fun to maintain.
There's another tip here. Okay, based on his experience, explore the repo here. And the other is now use stay hook. Yeah, say use stay hooks. Exactly. So help me rethink about it.
That's annoying, right? We expect the radio buttons to work so that you can select small, medium, or large. Well, the reason would be why this is happening.
Exactly. However, if we take a look at this, however, at this point, our app doesn't change the select button or the radar button. Why? So because we click on a select or on a radio, React detect that change and re-renders the app. It re-renders the app, our small app, right?
Right? So it goes through and it re-renders this component, says, oh, pizza type, pepperoni, right? And so it sets the value to be pizza type, pepperoni. So even though the user is clicking on something else, it's immediately setting it back to where it was because this isn't dynamic, right? This is just assigned, and then it just stays that way. So we have to do some sort of assigning pizza type to be something different, or else it's just going to continually be that. This is just a roundabout way of me explaining and showing you that two-way data binding is not free. There's some other frameworks, famously Angular 1. It could be shorter or more terse or something like that. It's a little less fun to write, but it's a lot more fun to maintain. And as I've gone through my career, I found that that's actually worked its weight in gold, right? I don't want to optimize for the couple of hours I'm going to spend writing something. I want to optimize for the hundreds of hours I'm going to spend maintaining something.
So on the user state, this is not a fun way to write your app, but a fun way to maintain it. So Brian Holtz, and even in my career, Brian Holtz, right? So Brian Holtz
Okay, so that's my spiel of why I think this is okay, despite the fact that it is.
So Brian Holt, I want to optimize for the hundreds of hours I'm gonna spend maintaining. I am. Brian Holt mentioned I want to spend or to optimize for the hundreds of hours.
Here I found that's actually worth its weight in gold, right?
Mention something that's worth it is worth exactly something that's worth its weight in gold. Exactly. So Brian Holt mentioned something that's worth its weight in gold.
I don't want to optimize for the couple of hours I'm going to spend writing something.
I don't want to optimize for the hours. I don't want to optimize for the hundreds of hours that I'm gonna spend on writing something. I don't want to optimize for the hundred hours of writing something I'm gonna spend. I am gonna spend on writing something. I want to optimize for the maintaining.
I don't want to optimize for the couple of hours I'm going to spend writing something. I want to optimize for the hundreds of hours.
Exactly. So I want to optimize for the hundred of hours that I'm gonna spend on maintaining something. Okay.
Okay, so that's my spiel of why I think this is okay, despite the fact that it is a little annoying. Interesting if you go try something like solid.js, which is very similar to React in many ways. They found a way to kind of make it work with something called signals. I think signals are in Preact as well now. I haven't worked in Preact in a long time. But anyway, suffice to say, other frameworks have different approaches to this, but React takes a very straightforward, I want to call it JavaScripty, that like they're just kind of working with JavaScript to make it work the way that JavaScript normally works, as opposed to having black magic around the framework to make it work. So let's go make this work with state today, right?
So they align a lot of the with
use something called a
JavaSpec.
And we're going to do this thing called import state from React. Anything that you see use in React, the alarm should go off in your head as like, this is a hook. Okay? So instead of these two, I'm going to say const pizza type, set pizza type, equals use state, and then you give it the default first value, pepperoni. Same thing with pizza size, const pizza size set pizza size equals use state, and whatever you want the default to be. We had it as medium, we'll just leave it as medium, but you can change it to large if you're trying to like drive up your margins or something like that. This is also, of course, on capitalism. I don't know if I told you that, but you're trying to like drive up your margins or something like that. This is also, of course, on capitalism. I don't know if I told you that, but all right. So, and whatever you want the default to be. We had it as medium, we'll just leave it as medium, but you can change it to large if you're trying to like drive up your margins or something like that. And whatever you want the default to be. We had it as medium, we'll just leave it as medium, but you can change it to large if you're trying to like.
You're trying to drive up your margins. Oh, okay. If you're trying to drive up your margins, something.
Drive up your margins
or something like that.
This is also, of course, on capitalism. I don't know if I told you that, but all right. So now we have this use state thing, but this now makes pizza type able to be set to be something different. It makes this React stateful, but we still have to call this set pizza type somewhere so that we can change it. So the way that we're going to do it is we're going to go on our select here. By the way, these are just highlighted because they're not being used anywhere. But we'll do that in just a second. Alright, so I'm just going to put some space here so you can see it right. We're going to do something here called onChange. And the only thing we're going to do is we're going to say E, which is like a normal browser event, right? Call it event. Just for so many years of doing this, I just always call it E, so it's really up to you. And we're just going to get this anonymous function and say set pizza type to be e.target.value.
Or you can deconstruct that.
Whenever a change event happens on select, call this function. This function takes in an event, and it calls set pizza type with the target.value. The target is going to be one of these options, right? Because that's what's actually going to be the, well, I think the target's actually the select, now I'm thinking about it. But the value will change, right? So the value will be whatever the option is, so this value will be whatever the user has set. We'll call that with set pizza type, which will then end up changing the pizza type up here, which kicks off a re-render. Now it's going to be correctly rendering the same thing. So if we set this, size is still not going to work, we haven't done that yet. Let's go try this one. We should be able to set this to something else. Congratulations, we unbroke it, right? Alright, so this is called a hook. Some rules around Fight Club. We don't talk about Fight Club. Some rules around hooks. You do talk about hooks. You can talk about it. That's fine. They can never be inside of conditionals. So never ever do something like this. If something, right, then use state. This is a big no-no because the one thing about hooks is that they depend on being called in the same order every single time. So if I did the conditional there, then it would sometimes give them to me out of order. So really what would happen is sometimes like medium would show up in pizza type, which is not what you want. So, in other words, conditional or hooks never go inside of for loops, while loops, do loops. They never go inside of conditionals. They're just always top level. Even if you don't use them, that's fine. Just never put them in conditions. You never have to, so you just sometimes you ignore a hook and that's fine. But you still have to call it the same order every single time. There's linting rules that will help you with that.
There are little rules that are gonna help you with the,
So
with
why
that
they
as
call
well.
hooks in my like head canon of why this is. I've never asked anyone this. This is just what occurs to me. Is there's a hook that gets called in the same order every single time. So it's like a hook being picked up, right? And they get picked up in the same order every single time in these render functions, right? Yep. Hooks rely on strict ordering. We talked about that. Oh yeah. Some of you might be thinking, like, this seems like a weird API, right? It is kind of a weird API if you think about it. I'm just so used to seeing it so frequently that, I'm a frog that got boiled, right? But it's just returning to you.
A frog that gets boiled.
API if you think about it. I'm just so used to seeing it so frequently that, I'm a frog that got boiled, right?
A frog that I get boiled.
It's just returning to you an array of two things: the actual thing and then the setter for the actual thing, right?
Which
That's
is a
just
tuple.
all that is, right? So you could definitely say like const pizza hook equals use state, right? And then you would say const pizza type equals pizza hook 0, and then set pizza type, right? This one line is the equivalent of these 3 lines, but we're all very lazy and we all write it this way. So use state is by far the most common one that you will use, but I will show you a couple other hooks, but just know that use state is by far the most common.
Someone online just asked me if you could console log just to show how the state changing.
Sure. Type, size. Alright. Let's just trash this. Alright. So you can see every time that a user event is happening here.
Let me actually test this because I want to make sure that that is what is going on. So for example, if I have now the order component here, right? And it would say, hey, anytime an event happens, React re-render this? Let's find out. I'm gonna say, hey, this is now pixel size, right? And pixel type, right? So I want to now run the dev server and say, hey, let's going to run this battery pixel pepperoni. Battery pixel pepperoni. That's right. Okay, and then we say something like this. Exactly. That's exactly what I want to do. So it only render this once, right? It only render this once. So because there is no attached to this, so React is never calling that function. So it's never, despite that it's trying to trigger this.
It's actually, it's interesting that it is smart enough to know that events happening in other parts of the DOM are not being observed, and so it's not catching those events. React has gotten a lot smarter over the years. They used to would have triggered a re-render, it doesn't anymore. So let's go make it work with pizza size as well. I'll show you so in theory, let's do it this way, plain about. So,
Mm.
and then this will start working, right? Because we have one event listener on the parent element, right? So observe, are you doing a re-render? It's interesting that it is smart enough to know that events happening in other parts of the DOM are not being observed, and so it's not catching those events. React has gotten a lot smarter over the years. They used to would have triggered a re-render, it doesn't anymore. So let's go make it work with pizza size as well. So with pizza size, there's other hooks, but just note this. Right. 8 is by far the most common. Very lazy, and we all write it this way.
So
value will
on
be
the
whatever
order
option, so this value
here,
will be whatever was being set. We'll call that with set pizza type. It'll then end up changing the pizza type of your
like
HTTP
this,
software
and say
render.
on
Now it's
change.
going to be correctly rendering the same thing. So if we set this, size is still not going to work because we haven't done that yet. Let's go try this one. We should be able to set this to something else.
Oh, because it's this one. It's like on change. I want to get now is the target. Okay, and followed by the target, and followed by the value. Alright, I want to destructure that, and then anytime you now pass this, it's gonna do is something like wrap this into something called a use state, right? A particular state. From that, we're gonna say, hey, this will be now a tuple. It contains the pixel type and set pixel type. All right. So you got now the user state. And we're gonna do the same, but right now is for the user state. Exactly, you already imported, which is a great stuff. Thanks for that. You help us a lot. And set pixel size. It's quite annoying to write all of this, right? But it's much more fun to maintain. So if we go down here and say on change, okay, I want to now update is the value here, right? Which is set pixel type with the value, right? If we render this and go back to the browser, we'll now be able to render that. What you can see is now rendering is the entire places. Yep. It's rendering the entire place. It's rendering all of this. Despite that order is being here, it's now rendering all of these elements. But it's not render this. You know, anytime that there is a state change, it's a let me now is render all of these elements that are down the tree, which is I'm going to now is take all of this stamp, right? Where this stamp where each stamp represents is a node on the render tree. In other words, anytime that I'm going to walk through this particular structure, this render tree, anytime that I'm going to walk through this, I need to print this with this particular value. I need to stamp this UI, and then this another UI, and then this another UI, until you get the final version of this.
So if we set these 3 lines, it'll re-render if it doesn't. So let's go make it work with pizza size as well. Events happening in other parts of the right. Let's just trash this. Alright. So you can see every time that it still works. And then this will start working, right? Because we have one event listener on the parent element, right? And so it's listening for just the one time. React doesn't like this because it views it as inaccessible, which generally you don't want change handlers on like divs because screen readers and all that kind of stuff can't access divs, they access inputs. I think it's, in this particular case it wouldn't matter because it's still bubbling the event no matter what, and so you can have a change event on the input and still work. But let's just appease the linting gods, and we're going to put this on all the individual inputs. It's more explicit as well, so I'm just going to put this 3 different.
So on change here, so by putting now here, so So when this input change here, React doesn't like that you do this, all right, because it's not explicit, and this is for accessibility. So you can put it this one here and say is when the target change, I want to set now the side of the pixel. Similar for this and for each one of them. So if you do this, now dynamically is going to take each element for that. In other words, it's going to render all of them. And you can see the state change similar for this as well.
Times all of these. Now you might say like, well, do I need e.target.value or should I do s here like this? Tomato, tomato, same thing. Because the value is coming from here. S here like this. Tomato, tomato, same
Tomato, tomato, same thing.
thing.
Tomato, tomato.
Because the value is coming from here, right?
Tomato, tomato.
But in both cases it works. So if you are having issues or just want to see where I'm at here, we're at 04-hooks, where we learned about use state. By far the most common hook that you'll use. And next we're going to talk about the next most common hook that you're going to use, which is useEffect. So state is all about statefulness in your component, things that can change over time with your component. This is frequently tied to forms, but you could easily write like a clock, right, or something like that, or something that. And the other thing is effects will usually be used with state as well, so they tend to combine and compose. But let's talk about effects. Effects like stands for side effects, right? So you have some component and it has something that's going to happen outside of it. Frequently, this is going to be like an API request, right? So you're going to go reach out to some API, it's going to come back with data, and this could be like, let's say you have something that if you want to show a clock, like a date time or something like that, you could be doing that with an effect because you can think of time as a side effect to your component, right? It's anything that's going to be inputting into your component that's not just user input or something. So let's go do that. So make sure your API server is running because we actually are going to hit the API. So let's go to order.jsx. So that's client. Just make sure you have that if you don't. And we're going to go to order.jsx and we're going to import useEffect from React. And we have pizza, cool. We're going to be doing some currency conversions here. So this is now just built into the browser, which is super nice. Number format, give it what format you want. Feel free to put this in your own locale. I'm going to show you how to do it with dollars. So this is currency, and I want the currency to be USD. So we're going to load in pizza types. So right now we just have like a flat list of all of these pizza types, but I want this to be a dynamically populated for all of our different pizzas. I, being the generous course creator that I have, I've created 32 pizza types for you, and we're going to use all of them. Most of them look terrible. It's just to be aware of that. So const, another hook here, another useState hook, pizza types, set pizza types. Equals useState with an empty array. Right, so this is basically going to say like start with nothing, and then we will progress from there. And then I'm going to have a loading hook. This is going to be useful for that. You can say like set loading to be true, and like we can show the user a nice spinner and not render stuff that's not available yet. And then once everything has loaded, you can say set loading to false, and then you can show them whatever you want. So useState, we're going to start by having the form be loading, right? Because it won't have all the pizza stuff.
Yeah, but this is not what you want to now fetch data from the server, right? This is a far server. No,
Okay.
there's no
Cool.
any weird stuff here. The only different stuff is the internationalization, right? That's the only perhaps different stuff here. the internationalization that we're gonna use, which is, hey, let's gonna use it, the internationalization. Okay. New internationalization. This is a namespace dot number format, where here I'm going to pass is now the locale first. Okay. Whatever locale has, it can be on the US or it can be from the whatever machine you're using, and then the number format options, which is style currency and currency USD, which is style currency and okay, style currency and currency USD, currency USD, USD, and I want to reserve space in memory for this. Okay, this internationalization. Okay, and then I want to add this particularly to states here. One of them is for fetching data. Okay. One of them is for fetching data here. Say pixel types. Okay. So counts. You can say it's use a state of the initial state that we want to keep track, that I want to reserve space in memory for these two stuff that I want to, the data and the setter function, the pixel type. So pixel types here, and the set pixel, right? Set pixel types. Okay, and the other is the loading screen. So you're gonna use is the user state that initially will be false or true. Okay, and then you define, I want to reserve a space in memory for the loading state or set loading. Right, pretty basic stuff here, and we have defined so far.
I'm going to say let price. I'm going to say selected pizza equals pizza types. Find pizza
Type.
type equals pizza.id. So why are we doing this? We're going to be keeping track of just the ID of the pizza type that's been selected. We have to go actually find inside of our array of pizza types the correct one, and we're going to do that by its ID. You notice these are not hooks, despite the fact that they're immutable. This is because it's kind of derivative state, right? So we can use this state up here to find this state. So this doesn't actually need to be a hook, because it's not. It's always going to be a function of these. Or sorry, these are always a function of these, right? So the price is going to be whatever the selected pizza's price is, right? Selected pizza is always going to be a pizza type that matches the pizza types, right? So view has this like a concept of derivative state. I think Svelte has it as well. It doesn't exist in React. You just keep track of it.
Mm-hmm. Or dependency here.
Okay. So now we guarantee here that selected pizza
This derivative type.
is going to be the correct pizza object that we're putting back from our array. We're going to write a function here called fetch pizzas. Async function fetch pizzas. Pizza types, right? Pizza types. And this is just going to be a really normal fetch command. So we're going to say const pizza res equals await fetch /in is this a bad?
Because you are, because at runtime it's gonna render that, it's gonna render the element first, and then when the data is available, it's gonna do that.
Yeah, run every single time the component rendered. That's a lot of. You're basically DDoSing yourself, right? Bad.
So you're basically here running these async functions uh, because you are calling this API, you are calling is this anytime in a state change.
Yeah, run every single time the component rendered. That's a lot of. You're basically DDoSing yourself, right?
You basically are DDoSing yourself.
Right. So that's not a good idea.
In other words, you are basically denying your own servers. DDoS yourself.
How can I be only like run this at the beginning, right? That's all. I only want to do it once when the
Mm.
first.
And I love this particular approach of this because again, this is just to invite you to think about what you're doing, why we are deriving this particular style as a way to get this style that you can get from your state, to get the data that you get from your state. In our case, we can say, hey, let the price and the selected pixel, selected pixel, right? And then you say, all right, if it's not loading, then I want to now select what is the pixel here, right? So the selected pixel, all right, will be now is the pixel types. I think is pixel types in plural. Pixel types in plural. All right, that I'm going to find that element based on this predicate where I have my pixel that must be the same. In this case, that must be that must exclude that, okay, which is most of the time we say find as a way to find this first element here, okay, not filter. This is different. Filter means this exclusion, so find it means this element. I don't know how they define that particular data, which is pixel. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's like pixel type. Okay. So pixel type is the same as pixel.id. All right. This is how they define the shape of this data. And then why this is not a good idea of say, hey, let's go to now call this function, say async function here, async function, and the name of the function, which is fetch. And I prefer to use this because this function's definition, the function declarations, are much more easy to debug or application. Why is that? Because it can tell you the name of the function. I think this is a pretty good opinionated way of thinking this. So fetch pixel, types. So fetch pixel types here. All right. So you say, hey, set loading is equal to, well, it's initially true, right? But I want to call that data. Okay, so the way to do this is by saying fetch this particular resource. I don't know where the resource is, or the name of the resource, API.pixel, right? So once you get that, I want you to wait for that, or in other words, pause the execution of this function, all right? And then once the data is available, return or pass control to these functions so we can resume from that and store the data in this place, right? Store the results inside of this comes here, right? So because this response must be transformed into a JSON because it comes from a binary. It comes in a raw stream of data, right? So we cannot use that, not in the human way as we are now, or not in a human readable way. That's why we have to transform this into a JSON, and because it's something that needs to be deferred as well. So we say, hey, I want you to await. In other words, I want you to delegate this and pass this to the event loop. All right. In other words, to be handled by the micro task queue. So pass that, and by the time that is done, all right, return control to this function and store that into a Pizza JSON, right? And return that, and then store the result into the Pizza JSON. So now with our Pizza JSON, we can now update our state here. Say set Pizza, say Pizza size, set Pizza, set Pizza, set Pizza what? Set Pizza types. Oh, set Pizza types, right? Okay. Set Pizza types with the Pizza JSON, right? And that's it. It's over. You say set loading is false, right? Why this is not a good idea? The other is the useEffect. So useEffect hook, right? useEffect hook. So in the following code, we add an async function to call our server, or to fetch some data from our server. Why this is not a good idea is because every time a change, or every time an state change, it will cause a re-render. It will cause a re-render, which basically you will DDoS in your own server. You know, that's not a good thing. That's not a good plan.
Effects. You found the need for effects. This is exactly what effects are for. Use effect. You give it a function of like, hey, I need you to do this kind of outside of the render side. So if you find that's exactly what effects are for. It's like, I have my renders. I have things that need to happen outside of the renders, and I want to kind of control when that happens. So in this case, we're going to say fetch pizza type. This isn't still quite what we want it to do. This is still going to schedule an effect after every single render. So how do we tell it, hey, we only want this to change once? There's a second parameter here of like, hey, whenever this variable is different from the previous render, do it again. So let's say here we put like, I don't know, pizza size. Now every time that the user selected a different pizza size, this function would get running, this effect would get run again. That's not actually what we want, right? We want it to run once, right? Just at the beginning. So how do we do that? Just don't give it anything, right? We just give it an saying like, I don't care, run this once, and then you're not tracking any variables here, so you're never going to run it. Make sense? Okay. You'll have to excuse like the backwards walk into like the logic there, but like usually people see this for the first time, like, why is there an empty array there, right? They get really upset by that. So I'm trying to walk you back into why that empty array exists there. It does make sense. It's a little dense to look at. Like that's a lot of syntax in one line of just curly bracket, square bracket, round bracket, or round parentheses, right? It does make sense. Okay, next question people might ask me, why can't I just make this an async function? I think Bert, you literally just asked me this. Async functions return what?
A promise.
They always return a promise no matter what. If it's an async function, the return type is always a promise. And effects, the return type matters. I'm not going to show you anything today where it does matter, but let's say you wanted it to run once and you wanted it to run at the end, not the beginning. This can be useful for like clearing timeouts. That's usually the time that I do it, or canceling, like using an abort token to like cancel a request or something like that. You can return a function. This is how you would do that. The return here is the cleanup function. So, all of this to say, you don't need to do that right now. It's a fairly rare thing that you need to clean up, but that's how you would do it. And that's why we can't just make this async, right? That's why I make an async function up here, and then I call it from my effect. Now select pizza, price, we're now fetch.
So you are calling it for your effect, or from your effect, because we don't use a async inside of our effect because it returns a promise, and because useEffect wants to track when a piece of code, in our case fetching data from the server, okay, and because useEffect wants to track a piece of code, so it can schedule it properly and have control over execution. Is my assumption right? You're on the right track, but there's a slightly nuance to clarify about useEffect and async as the effect callbacks. This is because an async function always returns a promise, while React expects the cleanup function, if any, to be returned synchronously from the effect. The issue isn't that React needs to track a piece of code is done, is that the function you pass to the useEffect can optionally return a cleanup function, which React will call when the components amount or before the effect runs again. So React is going to call that cleanup function before the component, or it will call the component once the component is mounted on mount or before the effect runs again. Okay, so when you make the effect function async, you are returning a promise instead of a cleanup function, which React doesn't know how to handle. But this is the shape of the function. The recommended pattern is always define an async function instead of your effect. That makes a quite sense. There is a reason why we are returning is an async function, because the reality is that Okay, the reality is that this expect is a cleanup function, right? And this cleanup function is some functions that you're going to return from that,
So
right? You say, hey, this is, for example, clear intermediate, clear interval. So clear interval, for example, right? And then you pass now the reference of that. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Cool.
all of this to say, you don't need to do that right now. It's a fairly rare thing that you need to clean up, but that's how you do it. And that's why we can't just make this async, right? That's why I make an async function up here, and then I call it. We're now set to pizza price. We're now fetching all of the pizzas. So eventually, this is going to be full of pizza types here. Now, this is like one of my favorite things again about React. By doing everything this way, I basically just sort of like treat all of my code down here as if pizza types already existed. It reads very optimistically in the sense of like, I just assume that the data is going to be fed here eventually. It makes the code not full of if this then that's, right? It's usually just like read as if the code's here, right? Let's go replace the options here.
We wrap it into useEffect.
Pizza types dot map.
Because the useEffect
Pizza.id. We'll talk about keys here in just a second.
hook expect a
Pizza.id.
cleanup function.
Alright, so this is a little dense here. Let's talk about this for just a second.
A cleanup
It's
function.
all concepts you know. Between the curly braces can be any JavaScript expression whatsoever, right? Right? If you're familiar with map, it's a JavaScript function. And you're taking an array of something and you're turning that into an array of something else, right? It's just a transformation from an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, and you say map double, you get 2, 4, 6, 8, right? Just transform one. We have an array of pizza types. We want to transform that into an array of components, right, or elements. That's all we're doing here is we're just turning an array of objects into an array of React stuff, right? Braces. Alright, so this is a little dense here. Let's talk about this for just then that's, right? It's usually just like read as if the code's here. Let's go replace the options here. Pizza.id. We'll talk about keys here in just a second. And value equals.
Exactly. So now that you get this,
Alright, so this is a little dense here. Let's talk about this for just a second.
we're gonna now
It's
is
all concepts
remove,
you know. Between the curly braces is
or at
any
least only
JavaScript
one,
function whatsoever.
and say I want to now is render this.
If you're familiar with map, it's a JavaScript function. You're taking an
So
array
pizza
of
type,
something, you're turning
pizza
that into
type,
something
which
else.
is
It's
like
just a
the pizza.
transformation
Is that the pizza
from
type?
1, 2, 3, 4, say map
All right.
you get 2.
Then you're gonna show all of this.
Just transform 1.
So what you're gonna do is to transform
We have
all
an
of
array
these
of
elements
pizza types. We want to transform
of
that
the
into
type,
an array of components.
or we can say
Elements.
pizza,
Doesn't really matter.
pizza type,
That's all we're doing here is we're just
okay,
turning an array of objects
into
into an array of React stuff.
a component here that we want to render. Here say pizza type, or he say just pizza, but I prefer to make this as a pizza type, be more explicit, and they now pass this gentleman. We're going to return this, and the easy way to return now a function like this is by just passing is this and wrapping into a parenthesis, pass the value here and say, hey, this is now the value of what you're going to render here. Pizza type. All right. And I'm not sure what is the name of this. Okay, key and value. Okay, which is pizza ID. Okay, pizza type ID, and followed by the key, which is pizza type here and the ID, followed by the pizza type dot id dot name in this case.
If you remember under the hood, like we saw, what is JSX transforming that into?
Into HTML.
Right? So if we give it an array of components, it knows exactly what to do with it. But like we saw, what is JSX transforming that into?
Into HTML.
It's an array, right?
So you transform this into an HTML
So
development.
if we give it an array of components, it knows exactly what to do. So that's why map here works. We're turning an array of these pizza objects just into an array of options. Make sense? You follow? So I think if we, obviously there's some errors here, but I think if we refresh this, we should see lots of pizza types,
Mm.
which is kind of cool, right? So if we refresh, look here at the network, you can see here we have I'm looking just at XHR, which are Ajax runs here. You can see it's hitting the API, it's getting a response back here of all of the different objects, right? And it's turning that into an array of options.
Interesting. So it broke.
Just to be facetious for a second,
Oh, pizza types. Right? Say pizza types. It broke, but at least it tells me where it broke, which is cool. So pizza types here. Say selected pizza. Selected pizza. So pizza types, right? And we select that. Pizza type is equal to the pizza.id, but it say pizza types is not what it's supposed to, right? Did I? It say that this is not a function. Oh, it's because the server is not running. No, in fact, the server is running. Request completed. Let's do this. 4041. So the server is fetching the data properly. If I take a look at the domain here, it's fetching the data properly. Pixel, GSX, and then the token, Pixel. So by the time that is now rendering is this, it now crash and say, hey, the above error occurred in the order component. So order component is the pizza types, right? So where it say, hey, I couldn't find that. So that method does not exist on pizza types. And you say pizza. Yeah, because it's pizza. Pizza type is equal to saying of pizza ID. That's right. It's supposed to be pizza types. And then you fetch the data. API pizzas. Because it's in plural. This is when stuff becomes. Then you got it. Okay. Exactly, there was an error here and it tells you not found. Okay, now when it found it, we can look at all of this as it is. Alright.
so I'm going to ask Copilot, wait here for 10 seconds. It creates a new promise, so waits it for 10 seconds, and then after 10 seconds it resolves it. So now if you look at this, wait here. Let's just introduce an artificial await here. And I can never remember how to write this off the top of my head, so I'm going to ask Copilot, wait here for 10 seconds. It creates a new promise, so waits it for 10 seconds, and then after 10 seconds it resolves it. So now if you look at this, it's going to be empty for the first 10 seconds, right? Because it got the information back, because it's all local host, right? So it's all instantaneous. And then after that, it comes back and then it finally set it. Make sense? Right. So that is our fetch pizza. That's our effect. Now, just for fun, we have our pizza down here. Let's pass our selected pizza in. So we have selected pizza dot name, selected pizza dot description, and I think it's selected pizza dot image. So if that works, so we have pepperoni here. Notice
That is now dynamically
it's
is
changing the title.
loading the image.
The description. We're not changing the price yet because we haven't put that part into our pizza command. There you go. Kind of cool, right? So now you can see how effect and state kind of layer onto each other to create this kind of like interactivity. One more stupid example. Let's just do the pizza size one.
This is now when you want to add now here, okay, is so for example, once you already load the data, which is part of the derivative state, select pizza, and then you on your pizza you say, hey, let me just render now this dynamically, right? Shall we? Which is selected pizza dot name. And then on selected pizza, the description, and then here it is selected pizza dot image.
Select pizza dot image.
Okay, it is. So once I save this, and then I look at this, and I save this, so once I have this pepperoni pizza, and it's gonna change in that as well. So anytime that is now updating the state here, or anytime that happening here, an event here, we can see how is this happening. So something that I'm quite familiar with, right?
One more stupid example. Let's just do the pizza size one up there that we were talking about. Pizza size here, the useEffect. I'm going to pop open my DevTools here. Notice that now every time that I click this, I'm getting another AJAX request to the API, right? Because it's just watching to see whenever that changes. But notice if I change this, let me trash this and see. Not doing it, right? Because we're not changing based on pizza type. We're only changing based on pizza size. I'm getting another AJAX request to the API, right? Pizza size here.
Okay, exactly. This is just to show off.
Notice that now every time that I click this, I'm getting another AJAX request to the API, right? Because it's just watching to see whenever that changes. But notice if I change this, not doing it, right? Because we're not changing based on pizza type. We're only changing based on pizza size. And if you wanted to change, if anything changes, give it no array, and it's going to get real mad and notice that DDoS yourself, right? Why am I DDoSing myself? Because it's re-rendering a lot, right? But look at my API here. It's just going hot wild.
It's going hot wild.
Alright, so why is it doing that? What am I doing right here? I'm changing the
and
state,
changing the state,
which causes
therefore a
which
re-rendering,
schedules an effect,
which is causing
changes
an
the state,
effect.
which schedules an
That's
effect, which changes the state, which schedules an effect, right?
okay, which is schedule an effect because that's what it's doing here. So in
if
changing
so
the
if you're doing
state,
something like that,
that's
probably
triggered a render that schedule
a
an
general
effect,
useful rule of thumb
and that
is if
effect
inside of your effect you refer to a piece of state,
trigger
you should probably
the
track
schedule an effect because this is what part of the mechanism here. This is an update in the state as triggers a re-render, and that schedule an effect that's trigger a re-render, a schedule an effect that's trigger a re-render, that schedule an effect, and so on and so forth. You know, it's like forever in that loop.
inside of your, they call this your dependencies, right? Your dependent state.
This is if you don't pass any array
So
of
let's
that.
say I had called pizza types with pizza size for whatever reason, then you normally see pizza size go here. That's just kind of a useful rule. And again, you can put as many, as many things in here as you want. So I have this price here, and I want to show the correct price from my order.jsx. So if we look here again at my response, you can see here I have the sizes. So this is saying the barbecue chicken, small is $12.75, medium is $16.75, and large is $20.75. And I want to display the right price here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say.
So depend of the size.
That.
Mm-hmm.
And then price up here.
I got to compute that
price
here.
is equal to format. I have to do this on these pizzas. Selected pizza dot size, and then we're going to give it the pizza size that's been selected. So right there.
So once you read from this size in the select pixel,
And then it'll only get set with selected pizza.
and the price here.
Let me make sure that's correct. Nope, I broke it.
Which is price. Price here will be is the selected pixel, right? But the selected pixel is data that you get from there. You just selected pixel dot size in plural. Where you want to read is the pixel type. The pixel type, the pixel size, the pixel size, because that will give you now is the price of that. So the value of that size contained is now the pixel. So if you want to render now price based on that, for example like this, you can say something like this. And if you go to this, you're gonna see that it'll be updated per size. So if we notice the JSON here, so if we notice the JSON here, the data that we're fetching from our pixels on the response, right? We have here now that it is like size, right? So size now is an object, all right? That it contains is already the value of that. This is the reason why we have this, right? So this is an object that is this object match what we have here. Therefore, we're going to be able to show that data. Okay, good, good.
But that's why it was working before and it's not working now, right? Because selected pizza is not real at this point, right? So if you try and set it to be something else, it's not going to work, right? So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to say loading. And if it's loading, I'm just going to show loading pizza, LOL. And if it's not loading, then I'm just going to show my pizza. Pizza size. Did I misname that? chicken here, and then watch the price down here. It'll move from various price to price based on what size you selected and what users. So let's talk about the ternary that I put in there because that's a little weird looking too. Again, anything inside of the curly braces can be a JavaScript expression of any variety. Ternaries have the benefit of being expressions, not statements.
So in this case,
Statement is an entire line. Expression is part of it. So I'm saying loading is an entire line. Expression is part of it. Expressions, not statements. Statement is an entire line.
statement is an entire line. The expression is part of a line.
Expression is part of it. So I'm saying loading.
It's also important to know about you be competent in this language here with your
Let's talk
tool.
about the ternary that I put in there because that's a little weird looking too. Again, anything inside of the curly braces can be a JavaScript expression of any variety.
JavaScript expression, which is a part of the statement. The statement is a full
Ternaries have
line.
the benefit of being expressions, not statements. Statement is an entire line. The expression is part of it.
Exactly. So it's an expression, and this particularly nuanced stuff here is very important to describe what's going on here. You know, because here you can say, hey, you can define as an expression, not in a statement, and a statement is a full line, and a expression is part of a line, right? So here, if the loading exists, now it is true, I want to render now is this one. Say, hey, loading. All right. However, if it's not, which is in our case, it's not, I want you to render now this one. Like so, right? So hey, loading, let me actually now check this expression. Okay, and if this expression is true, all right, I want to show you this, loading. And if it's not, show the other one. And it said yes, expression must have one padding element. All right, as you wish. So it must be something like this. Diff and another diff, closing diff, and now you get this, right? So if we look at that, anytime we're loading, you're gonna show now that. We can also mimic the performance there by looking at the disable cache, no trolling, blah blah blah. For example, like good. So by simulating as a load connection, you know, it's not rendering initially. Once that it load that React, okay. Wow, because we're using it as a development build. That's what it takes too much time. All right, but as you can see, it actually load that fast, not render initially, and then bam, it show this, right? If we enable the catch, it's also showing that for us. All right, so because it's doing this so fast that and also remember that we are fetching data close to our source, which is in our disk. If we need to wait from the data outside, for example, into some other services out there, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Realm, you will experience that latency. Okay, cool.
So I'm saying loading, which is a Boolean, true or false. If this is true, do the first thing. So if it's loading, show this very lovely and descriptive loading message, crafted with love and care, and run by legal.
crafted with love and care and run by legal. Crafted, construido con amor y cariño y ejecutado legalmente. Crafted with love and care and run by legal, bro.
Loading pizza.
Loading pizza, bro. Crafted with love and care and legal and run by legal. Oh crap. Crafted with love and care. You say loading pizza. Oh my god. Loading pizza. Oh my god.
If it's loading, show this very lovely and descriptive loading message.
You can say if this loading, show this love. Show this crafted with love. Show this crafted with love and care. Run by legal. Run by legal, man. Oh, you gotta love it, bro. If this is loading, show this crafted with love and care, run by legal. Pizza, loading pizza, LOL.
Crafted with love and care and run by legal. Loading pizza, and as soon as it's done being loaded, so once loading is false, right, then you can show the pizza because we have all the data there that we need. Make sense? JavaScript or React developers love their turn-ins. You'll see them everywhere in React. Okay, let's talk about key really quick. Key is here. It seems kind of strange. Let's just delete it here for a second. Is this actually? Oh yeah, good for you, React, for remembering to tell me that. And it's going to yell at you here in the console as well. So each thing should have a key. Probably seen it several times throughout the course here. What is this all about? All right, imagine you have extremely complicated components, right? They render a bunch of images and text and stuff like that, and then the user refilters. It just swaps like two components, like what was here is now down here, and what is here is now here. React doesn't have a concept of like what was here and what was where, and so what it's going to do is it's going to tear down everything and rebuild everything from the ground up again. Sometimes that's okay, sometimes it's not okay. What key does when you're doing like these kind of like map sort of things like we're doing here, and there's a lot of peer components next to each other that could be rearranged. We don't rearrange these, but in theory we could. What key does is saying like, here is a unique thing that's tied to this object. So like, what's unique to a pizza? It's ID, right? And so that way, if we swap two things, it's like, oh, you had this here, and now you have it here, because I have this like identifier that I can look at to see like this move from here to here. I'm just going to swap the components as opposed to tearing everything down and rebuilding it. Right? Does that make sense? So that's why it just yells at you constantly, it's like, please put a key on here. It's just a habit you want to get into. I will say here is a very common misstep here. What happens if I grab the index? Why is this not okay?
You gotta rebuild. Your index is not stable.
It's not tied to the object, which I think is what you're getting at, right? So if I move pepperoni from
It's not tied to the
index 0 to index 5, pepperoni and 0 weren't associated, so it's gonna think that it's like, oh, okay, 5 stayed in the same place, so I'm not gonna change anything. And it actually did change, right? So that's why you can't do it that way, because the index and the object are not tied to each other. There's no relation between those two things. That being said, there's just not a key to associate with something. Like sometimes it just doesn't matter if it gets reorganized. So you'll find me doing this sometimes where I just want the linter to shut up and get out of my way, right? You can do this way. With the index thing.
So the idea here is that with keys is because it doesn't throw any away. And it throw any away as a way to rebuild that, to get a sense of this. So it is safe for us to say, hey, claw, right? It is safe for us to say, hey, claw. GSX is the way of how React keep track of its element. Mm-hmm. Exactly, and there is a note here with keys. You know, something that is quite something that a lot of people actually miss. That is key. Okay. Tip. Tip one. Use keys that use key with IDs or any other identifier or any other unique identifier that that is close to relationship that or where the relationship with the object to be rendered and the ID exist. Mm-hmm.
So this is just kind of a brief overview on some helper things that you can do with React just to kind of like make it easier to work with. So one of them is we're using Vite, so Vite will take care of NodeM for you automatically. But NodeM, if you're not familiar with it, it's just basically telling the tools that you're working with. It's like, am I
Okay, so get status here. So get status here, and then you say get source, or I want to take a look at that. Say get diff source the order. And hook. Yeah, add useEffect and hook. Exactly. So git commit minus m, add useEffect and hook. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in development mode or am I in production mode? And usually it's assumed that you're in production mode and that you only set it to development mode when you're actually doing dev work. This used to be a thing that you had to set it explicitly, and that's why I still mention it here. So if you're doing like Webpack, you might still have to set it explicitly of like, I'm in dev mode right now. This is important to React because React has a lot of like helpers and better error messages and all that kind of stuff when you're in dev mode. But the actual executable of React is a lot slower and it's 4 times bigger. So, or at least that's what it was. I haven't checked recently how big it is, but it was quite big. So if you're using Vite, if you're following along with me, if you're using Next, if you're using Remix, they all set NodeM for you automatically. If you're using something like Webpack directly, you might have to set it yourself. One of the reasons I bring this up is that make sure this gets set to production when you actually do go out to production. That becomes important. Famously, Slack shipped React in dev mode for a very, very long time, and they actually saw a massive increase in like performance in Slack, because all they had to do was switch Node-env to production, right? Which is a very dumb reason to waste a lot of people's time and resources, right? So that's one. Strict mode, let's go do that right now. So strict mode is a kind of React mode you can set things in. So we're just going to go to app.jsx, and we're going to say at the top, import strict mode from React, and we're just going to wrap our entire app in it. Strict mode. So what is strict mode? It's just like an extra set of checks that React will do things for you normally, but in strict mode it'll say like, hey, you're executing in strict mode, I'm not going to let you do this. Usually what it is like, if you're using things that are about to be removed from React, it'll give you a big warning like, hey, this has been warned that this is going to be removed from a future version of React. I'm not going to let you use this because you're in strict mode. So they do that so that people know in advance that stuff's going to be removed from React. So that's what strict mode is. Yeah, continue to double renders your components just to make sure that all the effects are run twice, right? It can catch subtle bugs of like, sometimes you have effects that are doing something one time and working differently another time. That's kind of what they're supposed to catch. If you're asking me how many times has it caught something for me, the answer is not really, because like once you're in the mindset of like how effects and state is supposed to work, it's pretty rare that you would get outside of it. Last thing here, we're gonna install the DevTools. So I have a link down here for you. This should take you to the React docs, and they have DevTools available for Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. They used to have it for Safari, but I guess no one uses Safari, so they took it away. No one uses Firefox, but I'm happy they still maintain that one. So yeah, let me go show you Firefox. You should just be able to click here and say add. I've already installed this, so mine's going to stay there. It's the same thing with Chrome. And then what's cool about this, you should see down here at the end, components and profiler. So you get two little things that you get added by the React Dev Tools. So let's just go look at components. You can see here I have an app component, order, pizza. This is kind of the expected order of components that we have inside of our app here. If I click on order, I can also see all the hooks that happen, which is pretty cool, right? I can see everything coming in from, these are the pizza types, right? You can see I have a pepperoni, medium. Here's something kind of fun you can do. You can actually edit this directly. So if I hit this to, I think it's something like that, I break it. That's cool.
You break it.
There we go. All right, so notice this is barbecue chicken. I can actually edit this directly to be pepperoni. And notice when I hit enter, this is going to become pepperoni, right? Sometimes that can be useful, right? I can edit this to be small. It can be useful for debugging, just to see, like, if I change this to be this, what happens? Yeah, again here, you can see all the props that come into this one. Notice that props, oh, does it actually let you, it does let you edit props. That used to not be true. How cool is that? So that's that. I'll show you one other trick that I find pretty useful. All right, so if let's say I want to like investigate this radio buttons, I can click inspect here, right? So I click inspect. Obviously that takes me into the inspector. It doesn't take me into the React DevTools, but if I just go over to the React DevTools, usually it'll take you directly to that component, but it's probably because it's in the larger component. Oh yeah, this time it did. Okay, so that time it took me over to the pizza, right? This helps. Right now we only have 3 components. By the end of this course, we'll probably have like 50-ish, just because we'll introduce things like the router that have a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, the router has a lot of layers.
Component deeply buried in a tree. The last thing I'll show you is that we have that, and now I can hit $R. This is the component that I have selected in the React components, right? So you can see this is actually the pepperoni pizza. It's the last thing that I selected in the component tree here, which is more of a party trick than it is useful, to be honest with you. I don't find myself wanting to programmatically interact with it very much, but it is there, which is pretty cool. I mean, just another, this is totally unrelated to React, but I don't know if you click on this and you hit $0, you'll get the last thing you selected in the inspector, which is that I find myself doing that quite a bit more. So I introduce those now to you just so that for the rest of the course, if you have any questions or concerns, you can reference them kind of as we go. There is the profiler as well. We're going to talk less about that. But let's say if I just start recording.
This is useful
a bunch of
for
stuff here.
debugging.
Right, so blah blah. I click on stop. Our flame graph isn't super interesting right now. Like there's the ranked view, but this is going to show you like kind of the performance profile with the flame graph. If you have a big like React app and you want to see what is going slow and what's broken down, this isn't like designed to help you with that. Specific to React. I mean, these are kind of cool. I hadn't seen these before. So the way that React works is it has commits, right? So like they're basically like packets of things that have changed. And you can see what caused the update, how long it took, what the priority was, because you can have deferred and immediate updates. There's all sorts of fun stuff you can do. We're not talking about performance so much in this particular course. We might touch on that more in intermediate or maybe in a different React performance course. One thing, just kind of as a general note with React, it's generally fast enough. And when I say that, you kind of get to write React and be fairly naive in terms of like not worrying about performance, not worrying about commits or updates or anything like that. My advice to you is just continue writing React that way for the most part. Only introduce the performance enhancements when you have a problem. So stated differently, solve problems you have. Don't try to anticipate problems that you might have because you usually are wrong about the problems you're about to have. And while the performance enhancements for React work great, they make the code harder to read and harder to debug. And that's why I say don't do the performance enhancements until you need them, because it becomes harder to work with your code.
The reality is that everybody's doing monkey
we're gonna
patch.
talk about custom hooks, because you just hadn't had enough hooks yet. You got to make your own now. One thing that's kind of cool about hooks is they're composable. So let's say you had, well, let's just talk about the exact example that we wanted to build. Here at the bottom of my Padre Gino's page, I want to have a pizza of the day, right? It's going to be the same pizza every single day. Sorry, it's not the same pizza every day. It's going to be the same pizza throughout a day, and it's going to change the next day, right? I could write a component that goes in, requests the pizza of the day, renders that correctly, blah, blah, blah. But let's say I use the pizza of the day in that particular piece of information 7 places in my app. We really want people to buy this pizza of the day. We can write a custom hook that goes and just encapsulates all that logic into one thing. So rather than saying use state, use effect, and all these different things kind of intertwined, we create this one hook that says use pizza of the day, and then it encapsulates all of the logic for you, right? So it becomes this like reusable, composable hook. That's what we're going to try and build now. So let's first make our pizza of the day component that's going to display the information from pizza of the day. So create a new component here. We're going to call it pizza of the day.jsx. Import.
Oh, we add the strict mode
so,
here.
JSX. So what is strict mode? It's just like an extra set of checks that React will do things for you normally, but in strict mode it'll say like, hey, you're executing in strict mode, I'm not going to let you do this. Usually what it is like, if you're using things that are about to be removed from React, it'll give you a big warning like, hey, this has been, warned that this is going to be removed from a future version of React. I'm not going to let you use
In
this.
strict mode, exactly.
So they do that so that people know in advance that stuff's going to be removed from React. So that's what strict mode is. Yeah, continue to double renders your components just to make sure that all the effects are run twice, right?
Strict
You can catch subtle
mode.
bugs of like, sometimes you have effects that are doing something one time and working differently another time. That's kind of what they're supposed to catch. If you're asking me how many times has that caught something for me, the answer is not really, because like once you're in the mindset of like how effects and state is supposed to work, it's pretty rare that you would get outside of that. Last thing here, we're going to install the DevTools. So I have a link down here for you. This should take you to the React docs. And they have DevTools available for Chrome, Firefox, and Edge.
So strict mode?
For, Safari, but I guess no one uses Safari, so they took it away. No one uses Firefox, but I'm happy to still maintain that one. So yeah, let me go show you Firefox, you should just be able to click here and say add. I've already installed it, so mine's gonna say
Strict
that. It's the same
mode.
thing with Chrome. And then what's cool about this?
Strict mode.
Let me make my DevTools a bit smaller. You should see down here at the end.
It
Components
will
and
it will
Profiler.
notify
So you get two little
you.
things that you get added by the React
It will
DevTools.
notify you
So let's just go look at
features
components. You can see here I
that
have add
will
component,
be
order pizza. This is kind of the expected order of
deprecated
components that we have inside of our,
deprecated in
app
the
here.
feature.
If I click on order, I can also see all the hooks
Yes.
that happen, which is
It
pretty
will
cool, right? I can
notify
see
you features that will
everything
be
coming in
deprecated
from
in the
certain pizza
feature.
types, right?
Which is a good
You can
stuff.
see I had a pepperoni, medium.
Yeah, it will notify
Here's
you
something kinda funny.
feature
You can actually edit this directly. So
that will be deprecated in the future. And common gotchas when using exactly. And common gotchas when using is state,
and notice when I hit enter, this is going to become
use
pepperoni,
state, and use
Sometimes
effect.
that can be useful, right? I can edit this to be small. It can be useful for debugging, just to see like, all right, we're going to talk about custom hooks because you just hadn't had enough hooks yet. You got to make your own now. One thing that's kind of cool about hooks is they're composable. So let's say you had, well, let's just talk about the exact example that we wanted to build. Here at the bottom of my Padre Gino's page, I want to have a pizza of the day, right? It's going to be the same pizza every single day. Sorry, it's not the same pizza every day. It's going to be the same pizza throughout a day, and it's going to change the next day, right? I could write a component that goes in, requests the pizza of the day, renders that correctly, blah, blah, blah. But let's say I use the pizza of the day in that particular piece of information 7 places in my app. Really want people to buy this pizza today. We can write a custom hook that goes and just encapsulates all that logic into one thing. So rather than saying use state, use effect, and all these different things kind of intertwined, we create this one hook that says use pizza of the day, and then it encapsulates all of the logic for it, right? So it becomes like a reusable, composable hook. That's what we're going to try and build now. So let's first make our pizza of the day component that's going to display the information from pizza of the day. So create a new component here. We're going to call it pizza of the day.jsx. Import use pizza of, I guess we'll write that here in just a second, but go ahead and write it if you want to. Use pizza of the day from / use pizza of the day. We're going to do that same internationalization thing that we did earlier. It's new dot number format. It's so equals an arrow function. And then down here, just make sure you export default pizza of the day.
No, but I won't use that
Okay.
format. I don't like to use that format
Pizza of the day.
because it won't tell you on the stack trace which function,
Probably at least a couple times.
the name of the function.
Equals use pizza of the day. Okay. And again, the nice thing is like I haven't written this yet, but now that I've done this, I kind of get to approach the rest of the app as like just as if it was written, right? Which is pretty cool. If there's no pizza of the day, then return some very fancy loading state, which I'm just going to
Internationalization format.
and then I'm just going to write this component here.
Pizza of the day.
Day.
If you're surprised with that, this is now how you can do that. We're using emmet,
Div.
the emmet abbreviation.
Pizza of the day info. So we'll make that an H3. That's going to have pizza of the day dot name. Key. We're going to have pizza of the day dot description. Okay. And we have here we're just going to use, we're going to say from, right, meaning that it starts at this price.
Okay. We should pass this up.
And here we're just going to use, we're going to say from, right, meaning that it starts at this price. And we're going to say international dot format. That's going to be the pizza of the day dot sizes dot s, because the smallest size is always going to be the least expensive. Right?
So then after all, this is an object, by the way.
Div, okay. And then we just want an image of that pizza of the day. Okay, class name equals pizza of the day image. Source equals pizza of the day dot image. And alt equals pizza of the day dot name. And that should be good. Now we just gotta go write this, but this will display whatever pizza of the day that we get back from the API.
So this is all the structure that is going. This is all of the stamp. You know what we did is just to save this stamp here, but no, we're not using
Write
it.
our custom hook now.
Exactly.
So inside your source directory, we're going to create a file called use pizza of the day .js. You can call it .jsx. I don't really care. There's going to be no direct HTML or JSX rendered, so in theory you could call it .js. I'm lazy and I just call everything .jsx because later it might have it. I don't know. It's one of those things, like, again, like you can make a point for it either way. And either way, I'm just going to roll my eyes and say I don't care and do whatever you want. And export const use pizza of the day. So the nice thing is, like, to make a custom hook, it's just a function that calls other hooks. There's no wrapper for it. There's no additional function that you need for it. It really is just a function that calls other functions, and that's it. That's the entire concept behind a custom hook. Okay. And we're just going to encapsulate use state, use effect. Like, it's just going to be a combination of
I will
state,
definitely
state,
prefer to export default function
pizza of the
and
day.
use pizza name as a. What is that? Because if that fails, I can see the name of it on the stack trace.
We're going to have this start out as null or undefined.
Why is
or
that?
something
Because
like
it is
that.
helpful, especially if you're in a startup or in a particular component or library. It's like
void 0, whatever you want to put there. My notes have null, so I'm going to put that in there. Use effect. And then here we're just going to write our Ajax request.
mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to put my async function in here. It doesn't really matter where you put it, as long as it's in the function body. Fetch pizza of the day. Okay. Const response equals await fetch slash API slash pizza of the day. And I would have called this like POTD if I realized how many times I'm going to get sick of writing pizza of the day. Holy hell. Await response.json. Okay.
And then once you get that, you're gonna set that data. And once that is done, you want is to call the fetch pizza of the day.
How many times do we want this to run?
Only when we change that, when we call it. Okay, when we call it, we can say, hey, I want to call it only once.
What do we put there?
D, right?
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, if you were doing like pizza drops and people were really pumped about it, you'd want it to like change at midnight or something like that. But I imagine people are not that hyped about your pizzas. I don't know. I've waited in long lines for pizza in Seattle, so people do like their pizza.
In Seattle, people actually do lines for pizza. What the French sauce? Similar like this. Like, why in the earth, am I gonna do a line for a pizza, bro? I mean, I did, but and I did because there were people there.
So again, this is a custom hook. This is a concept that people kind of associate with React, but it's just a function that calls other hooks, right?
It's a function
like
that calls another function.
Pet peeve when it comes to like libraries, and people like to associate these like high mighty concepts and give them like fancy computer science names, when in reality, like, it's just a function. So just start calling it a function, right? Because because it makes things seem more unapproachable than they actually are, right? Nothing in here is new to you, right? But you probably heard the ideas like, oh, custom hooks. This is gonna be like some amount of formality, and I need my monocle and testing harness, right? No, it's just a function. That's it, right? And now pizza of the day works.
I think you're all to this.
Like, just mentally model this with me, right? You have this pizza of the day function that you're calling use this, right?
Exactly.
Inside of this is going to call two hooks. Now, the thing that I told you before is like, don't put them in if statements, don't put them in for loops or while loops or anything like that. But what is this actually doing, right? Inside of it,
It's just calling this
hook,
function.
it's calling this hook, and it's calling them in the same order no matter what, right? It's just in another file, which is okay, and that makes it a custom hook. Makes it a function. Okay.
So custom hook is a
Now we
way
have
of how
pizza
you
day
can call several
component. Let's go put that
hooks in the
text,
same
'cause we
order.
want to show that to everyone all of the time. We are pushing pizza. Again, this is Intro to Capitalism with Brian.
In other words, they are just a
By the end of
function.
this, you're all gonna be pizza barons. All right, pizza of the day there. Under order, I think is where I put it. Yep. Pizza of the day. There we go.
And then once we render the component,
So it's my dev server still running? Make sure your dev server is still running.
and it's gonna render
Down
that
here,
pixel of the day.
you have pizza of the day. Pretty cool, right? This actually does change. So tomorrow it'll be something different.
But on the server.
So when do you want to use a custom hook instead of just creating another component?
Yeah, it's a
So when do you want to use a custom hook instead of just creating another component?
yeah, it's a good question. My first answer to your question is there are divided opinions on that. So there's not a right answer here. The extreme side of one of it is there are some people that I know that will say never put an effect in the component ever, period, end of sentence, and that any effect should always go in a custom hook. That's one side of it. There's an amount of validity to it because then the nice thing about custom hooks is they become easy to test in isolation, right? As opposed to like a part of a great component, you can test just that the hook is working. That can be nice, right?
Absolutely.
The other side of people's like never write any custom hooks, always put it in the component. I think there's less validity to that. I'm probably mostly to the side of most effects should probably end up in custom hooks if they're shared at all or need to be tested. Which usually one of those is true, right? Yeah. So the nice thing about like this hook and during the testing section, you'll actually write tests for this hook, so you'll actually see how to test hooks. We can test that it's calling the API, it's using the right parameters, it does the right thing when there's nothing there, it does the right thing when there is something there. It becomes very, very straightforward, very easy to test. And then now, if I had like let's say I was writing like the admin dashboard for this, and I needed to fetch the pizza of the day so I could show like stats for how many pizzas of the days that we were able to push. I could just use this hook all over again, right? Yeah, and this just immediately gives it back to me. I don't have to rewrite the logic again. So hopefully that kind of bounds the box of where your opinion should lie, right? Somewhere in there. In this specific case, where we only are using pizza of the day in this very one place, I'm going to put it in the component because this is not an interesting enough custom hook for me to try and encapsulate it or test it to all hell and back, right? I'm sure you've all heard of dry code, right? Do not repeat yourself. I'm a wet code person. Write everything thrice. The third time I go to copy a piece of logic, I'm like, okay, maybe I should put this into a module. And
Exactly, but the third time.
First time, absolutely not. Second time might be a fluke.
Might be a fluke.
Probably is like app code that I need to test. There's kind of my methodology. Up to you.
Let's say that the network call takes a long time to respond. Will this cause a delay in the rendering from the custom hook, or will it return undefined first, and then when it has a value, return the updated value?
Good question.
Great question.
Let's walk through it. Pizza of the day.
So let's walk through.
Section, I'm never saying pizza of the day ever again, for the record, until we get to the testing section, and then I'm right back on the pony. Okay, so I have this function here, and I'm never saying pizza of the day ever again. Good question. Let's walk through it.
Pizza of the day.
Pizza of the day. After we're done with this section, I'm never saying pizza of the day ever again.
Picks of the day.
for the record. Until we
Okay.
get to the testing section, and then I'm right back on the podium. Okay, so I have
So
this
I have
function here,
exactly.
which calls this.
Which calls
this is not
this-
a wait or anything like that.
Which call this function. Okay.
This is just directly calling the function.
So what this function
So
is gonna
This is
call?
not awaiting. This is sync. So this is going to.
Mm-hmm. So this is sync. It's not awaiting. Exactly. They call the function, right?
Call this.
And then we call
to go
this
into here.
exactly. It's going to execute now this user state.
Be null, right? It's then going to schedule an effect to be.
It's going to schedule an effect here.
Mind, renders finish first before their effects happen. So you,
Exactly. Keep in mind that render finish before effects happens. Okay. So after so your first render is always going to be done by the time the effect is
your first render is always going to be done
by the time the
effect
effect is actually run, right?
So this effect, this function here, is scheduled to run but does not run yet.
Exactly. So it has been scheduled, but it's not run that yet.
What gets returned on the first render?
Good question. What get returned to the first render? If we go back, right?
Null.
No.
That's the default value. So this is in pizza of the day for the first render before this effect has been run. This return here is going to be
No.
null, which means here is null. So what happens when we hit this block with null?
So picks of the day, it say, hey, is this null? All right. If this not null, okay. If null is not null, which means that exists. That's another interesting question here because it's like, what the French toast is this? It's a true. Okay, if that exists, which is false, here we go. So null. So say, hey, if this is null, which means if that exists, this is here we go, JavaScript. Here we go, JavaScript. Here we go. I'm not that competent. That's what happened. Here we go. And not that competent.
It's going to just return.
So it's gonna return null, okay, and it say, hey, it's null is different. So it's not null, which means it's true, it's gonna render that.
Returns, right? This is an early return pattern, right? And so none of this gets run. It just returns this and short circuits here.
Exactly.
Now the effect runs. We get back from the API. The set gets
Exactly.
called,
So
the set
after the because it's this, and this is important to understand this particular way of how now React actually render these elements, especially with this pattern, when you have now a custom hooks. All of this is synchronous, right? You get in the function, you get now the state here, and then you effect. And if your effect is going to run after the renders happen, okay, after the render is done. What is the initial render? In our case, if we're particularly here, is null. So this is the value that is going to return. Adding here is going to evaluate that. And to me, it was like, what? Null, if null is if this is not null, which is true, and here's when JavaScript get a little bit quirk here. Hey, if this is true, all right, if you return me a value that is null, right, it's gonna render this because it's doing now this is doing this coercion, bro. It's doing this coercion. So what is the opposite of this? So what is the opposite of this? Is true. Oh my god. So what is the opposite of null? Jesus. But no, This is the intrinsic nature of this particular value in JavaScript.
Rendered again. This is now actually an object that came back from the API. Is it null? No. So all of this is going to get rendered. So I mean, let's just super draw this out into being agonizing. I'll wait for 10 seconds. All right. So.
Mm-hmm.
See this very small loading down here? I am very talented with loading spinners, as you can see. But nothing is being rendered down there, and then eventually it shows up.
And they eventually show.
A lowercase u on the file name of the customer, the naming convention.
Yeah, so like use pizza of the day here. Let's talk about the name kind of in general. It's a lowercase u because it's not a component, right? What is this returning? This returns a hook, which is not renderable by and of itself in React. It's a part of a composable part of what a component can use to get data. So maybe stated differently, only components have the convention of being named in uppercase. And just to be super clear, the file names really don't matter. You will see people call this like pizza.jsx like this. Because like Linux file systems are insensitive and most of our stuff is always running on Linux, right? So you can run into issues actually by uppercasing things. That did happen to me at Netflix one time. That usually doesn't matter. Usually don't have to care. Usually the convention of putting uppercase here is useful for me at a glance to say like this is a component and it exports a component. So another way of stating this is not a component, and anything that's not a component I always just lowercase name. It's really only components that get the uppercase. And then we did talk about earlier that it is important for the name of the thing, so looking at order here, that pizza does need to be uppercase P for that. Now, the next thing to say is use. Hooks have use in front of it. That is a convention. It's not necessarily going to break React, but if you use in your name, then all of the React linting will catch errors that you would do with potentially with a hook, right? So we haven't put it in here. In fact, I don't even know if I do it in here. If we go into pizza of the day here, and if I say like something like if true or something like that, is this going to catch this? It does. Look at that. Nope. Never mind. It doesn't. If I had the React hooks ESLint rules in here, it would catch this because even though pizza of the day is not its own type of hook, it knows it's like this begins with use, and therefore I know that this cannot be inside of an if statement. Beyond that, it's just very easy to see at a glance. Use pizza of the day, very obvious that this is a custom hook, right? So while you don't have to, as your future coworker, you do have to.
As a future coworker, you do have to.
So I've had a broken layout here for a little bit. If you've been following along, the layout actually probably was correct, but I messed some of my divs up. So let's just go ahead and fix where some of these actually end up going. So one, the order pizza is actually supposed to be in this. I imagine this is what most of you have been seeing for a while. And the last thing that I did break, if you go to app.jsx, one more kind of fun thing that we can do with hooks. Here in the use pizza of the day, we're going to use one more hook here called use debug value. I'll be honest, I sparingly use this, but I'm going to show you because it can be useful, particularly if you have a large code base and you're maintaining a set of hooks that a bunch of developers use. Let's say that we want to be able to see at a glance in the React Dev Tools what the value of our hook is. Because it's not immediately visible in the component view, you can kind of give it hints. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to say use debug value. And if we have a pizza of the day, then we're just going to say something like this. Like I'm going to use a template string of pizza of the day dot name. You can put whatever else here that you want to. Like maybe, I don't know, description. We'll put description. I don't know what else. What else here you would ever want to see? Like let's do ID. That's a good one. Let's do name here. We'll do ID first, and then we'll just put a colon between it. And then you need a ternary there. And if nothing's there, then you just want to display like loading, right? So it doesn't return anything. This is purely for developments. This is purely for the dev tools. When this is in production mode, this won't get locked out, I don't think. So now if we look in the React dev tools in our components, and I look at my pizza of the day, you can see here, tells me my hooks. And notice like this nice looking string next to it. This is the debug value, which is kind of nice, right? So imagine if you have like 30 custom hooks in there, it has like nice values for your custom hooks there. I think you can only use debug value once. I think if I try and use it again, it just doesn't do anything, or maybe it overwrites it. Oh no, it actually does give you an array of things. Interesting, didn't used to do that. Kind of useful. And there's nothing to stop you from just fully just throwing the whole thing on there, right? You don't necessarily need to do that because that it will be inside of your hook, right? So mostly it's just something that you want to be able to tell like at a glance the difference between all of them. In reality, if this really was me, I probably would just put the ID. Because this is very readable at a glance, right? The green garden ID, right? So that is specifically the very niche use case for use debug value is for custom hooks identifying them at a glance.
Okay. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.